Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Athlete Climate Academy for another season. I'm so excited to cap off this season with our first interview, which is with the wonderful Graham Zimmerman. Graham, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, I am delighted to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, I've been meaning to get you on for such a long time because everything that you do seems to go hand in hand with everything that we do. So it's such a great fit.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's interesting. It's we're operating on different sides of the Atlantic here, but most of the work that we're taking on is pretty similar in terms of how we're talking about climate and who we're activating to talk about it. It's pretty exciting. So yeah, thanks for having me on.
You're very welcome. Thanks for being on. So your backstory, I feel like there's a lot to tell. We've got a 30-minute podcast. We're going to spend a little bit of time on it. So I love when people ask me, what do you do for a living? Because it's such a hard question to answer. So I'm going to give it to you. What do you do?
Great. And I'll keep this concise because, like many of us, there's all sorts of stuff we could talk about. But right now I work as a professional mountain climbing athlete. I've done that for 10 or 15 years. And it's been, climbing has been the thread that has really woven its way through really my entire adult life. And it's taught me a lot of lessons. It's given me a lot of amazing partnerships, a lot of opportunities. And one of the things that it's really clued me into is climate change. I also actually have a background in hydroglaciology. So it's something that I academically do I'm pretty clued into as well. And for many years, I've, supported my climbing outside of being a professional athlete through various jobs. Just kind of make sure that I can pay the bills and that kind of thing. And for many years I worked in content creation. So I ran a film production company called Bedrock Filmworks, which was a really great way to dive into how we can tell stories around issues, particularly around climate. And more recently, I've stepped in full time with Protect Our Winters, and I've been working with Protect Our Winters since 2016 when I joined their Athlete Alliance and started kind of advocating with them, going to DC, going to state level legislatures here in the United States to advocate for our climate, and then also doing a lot of community work. And then subsequently, I became the captain of the POW climb team, so kind of the leader of the climb program, working with other climbers in the United States to help them develop their voices and get them activated at different events and things like that. And then just at the beginning of this year, I had the opportunity to step in full time as the alliance manager. So kind of coming on full time with POW, and actually, so I sold the production company that I was running, and now kind of down to sort of two jobs, working as an athlete and working with POW, and they are super interconnected, and it's really powerful. It's really cool to be able to work with folks, and POW is really the organization that gave me the ability to speak on climate. They really taught me how to do it, and a lot of my role in this new position is actually coaching folks on how they can speak about climate, how they can utilize their stories from the mountains, from the ski areas, from the from our waterways and from the oceans to get out and be advocates for our climate, and I think do so in a really powerful and tangible way, which is really exciting.
It feels like it's something that doesn't happen that often where, well, I feel like it's happened to me, and it obviously has happened to you, where everything that you've done in your life through the athlete persona, through science and your background there and filmmaking, everything has just led to this one point where you get to use all of your skills. I imagine there's a few little skills that you have that you can't shoehorn in, but it feels like all of your life has been heading towards this one point, right?
Yeah, I can totally get behind that sentiment, and I think it's an interesting thing about climate is that it touches every one of us, and it touches everything that we do. So it's kind of, sometimes it feels like, oh my gosh, like this is this crazy serendipity that that everything is pointing me towards this climate work, and then it's and then you realize that actually just climate affects everything we do and every point of our society, every point of our economy. And so then it becomes like less serendipity and more like, oh my gosh, this is just such a big problem that we need to work on and that we need to activate folks on. So yeah, absolutely. Everything has led to this work. And I'll tell you what, it's been really amazing to have the opportunity to take, for me personally, these stories that I have from the big mountains of the world, a lot of time spent in the Karakoram and the Himalaya and the Alaska range and, and spending enough time in those ranges to really see change taking place. And to be able to use those stories from those places, not just as a tool to encourage people to go climbing or to sell jackets or shoes or whatever, which is, of course, like those things are an important component to being a professional athlete, but to be able to leverage those stories and those observations to drive change around something that is, really the biggest issue that humanity is facing right now, is pretty badass and something that I really enjoy, feels really meaningful to me, and I'm really happy to be able to share with others.
I love that idea of flipping it on its head and saying, everything that I do, I can use in my climate change role, in inspiring others to take charge and do things in climate change. But also, when saying that climate change affects absolutely everyone, it doesn't matter if your background is in languages, or if it's in ecology, or it's in teaching, or it's in civil engineering. Like, it's going to touch everyone's lives at some point. And
Yep.
I feel like I've been doing science communication now for about 15 years and talking about climate change. And I feel like in that, especially over the last decade, we've made a lot of progress in how many people talk about climate change. What's it like? You're from New Zealand, you live in the States, you've traveled over the world. What are the differences you've seen in people's perceptions of climate?
Gosh, that's a great question. The thing that I really come back to with how people get at climate, how people talk about climate, how people are affected by climate is, I live a very privileged life, being in the United States, working as like a pro athlete, and living where I do in Central Oregon. It's my ability to adapt to climate change is pretty high relatively. It will still certainly affect me. It is affecting me. But when I look at my friends who are living in Gilgit-Baltistan in northern Pakistan, where I've been spending a lot of my time climbing recently, they have very little agency in terms of how they adapt to climate. My form of adapting to climate is like closing the doors and windows when it's smoky outside and putting on a bunch of filters that I'm able to go buy at the shop. They're like, putting in rock gabbins to like protect their entire village from floods, from increased runoff from glaciers and snow, due to warming temperatures in that range. And then their ability to drive advocacy, for them to drive policy, is also severely limited by the fact that, on a global scale, they're suffering from pretty severe poverty. They do not have communication tools. Like in northern Pakistan, they don't even really have government representation. So I look at how they're affected, and that's really a lot of what drives me in this work. I'm working on utilizing these stories that people are fascinated by, of like trying new routes on K2 and winning the gold medal of alpine climbing and all that stuff, and utilizing those stories to drive change. But it's really just a tool. I'm like, if I'm never able to climb again in the big mountains because of climate, that'd be a shame. I would rather be able to go climbing, but the impacts that it's having on other folks are so much more dramatic and so much more like holistic to like their entire lives. And that's like the reason why this work is so important. So when I look at, others around the globe and how they are affected by climate and how they're getting at climate, really the social equity question of how climate affects those, kind of on the global scale is I think one of the most important things that we can engage with. And I also think is interestingly a reason why I talk a lot about the concept of imperfect advocacy and how I don't want us to move towards a world where we don't travel and we don't engage with global culture and, allow ourselves the ability to, create these inroads between, places like, Bend, Oregon and Skardu in Gilgit-Baltistan, because I think that those interactions are so rich and they are something that creates so much value for humanity as a global species. And so that's why I'm really focused on the concept of like, let's use the stories that we have to drive systemic change that leads us towards, decarbonizing air travel, towards decarbonizing the way that we transport ourselves and goods around our countries and around the world, and the way that we heat our homes and get electricity and that kind of thing. That's really how we're able to progress forward as a global society, while still addressing climate, rather than like this whole concept of like, oh, I'm going to stop flying and driving and stop heating my house and just like live off of carrots that I grow in the backyard. That's like not, it doesn't like get us where we want to go. That's not taking us towards the world that we collectively want to live in.
Yeah, as someone, I'm sure you the same as myself as a progressive, I always want to see that progress moving forward. I want to see people lifted out of poverty. I want to see new science, new technology, making lifespans longer and less disease. And, as a scientist, I'm always looking for new technology and new science to make lives better for everyone on the planet. So to say that we want to take a step back and say, well, we can't fly anywhere now, or we can't do this, that's never going to happen. And frankly, I don't think it needs to happen. We have the technology, we have the skills, the science, the engineering to quote unquote engineer our way out of this. Now, that's not saying that we can keep pumping out carbon emissions and then capture all of it. That's not the engineering I'm looking for. The engineering I'm looking for is I can definitely put 20 solar panels on the top of my house and use all the energy that I want. And that's something I've been pushing for from my end, is saying to people that, you can have all the energy you want, but it just needs to be a clean, renewable way of doing that. And I think we've gone into this thing of asking people to, switch off a light every time that you leave a room, and to put on a jumper instead of heating your house properly. Whereas, if we use the right technologies, and those technologies exist right now, then we can have all the energy that we want.
Yep. I absolutely agree. And I think, we have to live examined lives. I think that's important for just being a good member of society, is understanding how you're affecting others, affecting, how you're affecting the environment around you on a personal level. That's important. But it is not how we solve climate change. We solve climate change through systemic change, and that allows for us to progress forward. And I think one thing that I'm really careful of is there is this kind of like technologist point of view that's very pervasive and, down in like the kind of tech centers of the world. I specifically think about California, but they're, all over the world these days. And this idea that like, oh yeah, we just got to like keep doing what we're doing and keep progressing forward. But I look at the progress we are making, and we're really making some great progress with things like social media and, the latest iPhone or whatever. And I do think that as we look at how we focus, our best and brightest, we do need to find ways, whether it's through policy or through education, to encourage folks to be working on, these problems that really matter, like climate, like social equity. Because that's, it's like, we're not going to solve those problems. We're not going to create the progress we need if that pathway is not encouraged. And so that's, in the United States, we're working on policy around climate to try to like clear those pathways so that we can move in that direction. Because right now we're pretty, we're kind of bogged down. We're bogged down in this like quagmire of what's going on with Congress. We're bogged down with, our reliance on fossil fuels alongside how subsidized those fossil fuels are. And if we can break down those barriers and allow those pathways towards a green energy economy and things like decarbonized travel to flourish, then that's going to have us heading in the world that we want to go and that we need to go in.
But it does feel that we've over the last 30, 40 years, we've been stumbling forward. Like progress has been happening, but we've just been like, oh, that's a good way of powering stuff. Then let's use that. Or that's good technology. Let's do that. And not consciously thinking about it. And I tell people time and time again in different training sessions and things that any move is a good move if it's a conscious move. Like you can break the rules and you can do things, but you've just got to do it consciously. And it does feel we've been pushing forwards, without consciously thinking about what does this do to the planet? Do we really need this technology? We're still living on the internal combustion engine to power our vehicles. And geez, that should have been out 20 years ago. Like there is no reason why, just from a technology point of view, we should still have the internal combustion engine. It's old materials, old technology. And it's something that Power's been really good in advocating is pushing for that from a policy point of view. So, there's a little bit of back and forth on, is this an individual's problem or is it a system problem? And it could be a little bit of both. It could be a little bit of neither. It could be, sometimes more, sometimes less. But Pow's really focused on how do we change this from a systemic point of view. So can you give us a little bit of background on what Pow is, Protect Our Winters, how it started, and your real, key message?
Yeah, absolutely. So Protect Our Winters is an organization that was started in the United States in, I think, 2007 by a fellow named Jeremy Jones, who's a professional snowboarder. And really POW has grown a lot during that time. At the beginning, it was just Jeremy and his pals like trying to go to Congress and advocate for, climate being important. And as it's grown, we brought on more policy experts. We brought on, more kind of like experts in terms of like how we talk about climate, in terms of like communications and things like that. And it's really developed to this point where it is a program that trains professional athletes to be climate advocates and then gives them opportunities to get out and utilize those skills in order to drive the change that we need. And like you said, a lot of what we're working on is pushing for systemic change rather than personal change. And like I said before, like personal change is like, we got to be personally progressing. That's like part of being a good human. That's part of being, part of the species. But the way that we solve climate is not like me taking one less flight is not going to change anything. And something that we talk about a lot is, so let's see. Last summer, I went to Pakistan for 3 months to try a new route on K2. And I think the entire carbon footprint of the trip was like in the realm of 17 tons of carbon, which is a lot of carbon. But if we look at in the United States, like the top 10 coal fire power plants, they're putting out, I think it's 64 million tons of carbon. And so it's like you compare like 64 million to 17, wow. Like one of those is like not a rounding error in the other. So it's like, let's talk about like how we solve this problem. We solve it by moving towards a green energy grid. We move it towards, we move towards EVs. We move towards decarbonizing air travel. And those are like the big chunks that we can work on rather than all these like little individual changes that are honestly deeply hindered by the fact that the system doesn't support a carbon neutral lifestyle. And so, it's been this thing, like we talked about this, we've talked about this when we've hung out in the past, the kind of like one of the major hangups that you have with athletes is this idea of like, well, I fly, I drive, I can't be a climate advocate. And it's like this, and part of the reason is because, people on the internet can be really mean about like, well, you fly.
It's a nice way of putting it.
Yeah. I was trying not to use bad words. But when it comes down to it, like if we lean into this concept of imperfect advocacy, really anybody in, the developed world advocating on climate is an imperfect advocate because we're living in a system that requires the use of fossil fuels in order to power our computers, to make those phone calls to our representatives, to, get on to get onto Twitter and, make those posts, or to travel to these events where we're advocating on this stuff. And so it turns into this conversation where instead of like being, being a major hypocrite, we're actually an example of how we move forward. And if I can be an advocate, then like anybody can be an advocate. And then for all of that advocates, then we can get some shit done. And that's really what it's all about, is to really kind of demystify the movement towards, climate solutions, and to make them more accessible for a broader community. And that's that's how we work together and get this work done, which is why that kind of like theory of change that Pow is leaning into is something that I really believe in.
Yeah, there's a little myth that goes around. It might be a real quote from way back when, saying that Edison created the light bulb by candlelight, and I love that idea of, we are all working by candlelight in the carbon intensive world that we live, but there's no reason why we can't push towards better technology and new way of doing things and the likes. And just to put that, what you said into perspective, that we have a carbon intensive world around us, and that the system doesn't really want us to use less carbon. I'm out to Chamonix the end of May for some training and things, and I've been having a headache the last couple of weeks. Like, do I drive? Do I catch the train? Do I fly? Flying is by far the cheapest option, even if I rent a car out there. It's on order 3 times less than catching the train, maybe more. It's probably 4 times less than driving, because I got to get the tunnel and things as well. And it's crazy. I'm like, I want to do the less carbon intensive thing, but for some reason the system wants me to pay 3-4 times as much to do the least carbon intensive thing. So I like the idea of making sure that, as long as we're conscious about it. And one thing we've been talking about a lot in the training is to not just to have so much guilt, that, climate guilt that comes along with doing anything in the developed world. So I like the idea that you as an athlete and Power encouraging athletes to say we can be advocates, but that doesn't mean that you can't live your life in the way that you want to.
Yeah, there are kind of 2 things I'd like to kind of like drill into that you just said. One is that, the cost. So you're talking about, you're making this choice of like this trade-off, like, do I take this cheap carbon intensive model of transportation, or do I spend more to save carbon? And that results in this like massive social equity problem where like, I might hedge to guess that you could, figure out in your finances, like how to go with the, how to go on the train. But man, it's like somebody's living near the poverty line. They like have to, they're forced into a carbon intensive solution so much of the time when it comes to travel, when it comes to food. And so that's, so then if like carbon neutral solutions that we're pushing for are only for the privileged, and like that is just not going to work. Like if like living a carbon neutral lifestyle is like something only for like the rich, like that's that's not going to fly. That's not going to solve anything. So it's like if we're working on systemic change, then we're creating change for everybody. And so it turns into, a way for us to not only drive change, but also like move towards social equity, which is like, which is what we need. And that's like the thing, like these 2 things are hand in hand. And we have to, like, we can't, like solving climate can't be something that you like need a lot of money for, because that's just not going to work.
So we've got the individuals making individual change, the systems that need to change. We're asking, and Power's asking athletes to be those individuals to create systemic change. How can individual athletes start to make those steps towards creating that systemic change?
Yeah, great question. So I think that there are a couple of things that we can get at, and I think this is, this is for athletes. I think this is for really for anybody. But as we look at, like, at least in the United States, the lowest hanging fruit in terms of the actions that we can take are, it's really to vote. As we look at how we drive policy change, how we drive systemic change, a lot of it has to do with like how we're voting and what we're voting on. Wedge issues get in the way of a lot in the United States. We talk a lot about guns. We talk about a lot about things like abortion. And if we can really be elevating climate so that more people are voting specifically on climate, and then generally speaking, so that more people are voting and are able to vote, then we have a more engaged representative democracy, and we're moving towards solutions. So when I think about like the thing that we're asking people to do, it's really like vote. It is, and it's pretty easy. My ballot, I think, shows up today for our primaries here in Oregon, and it's not that hard. So then the question comes down to, it's for folks who are influencers or folks who want to have influence on their communities, and I want to really be inclusive with that statement. That doesn't need to mean you need to have like 10,000 or 100,000 followers on Instagram. Like, you can be an influencer in your community by like sitting around the table with your friends. And the way that we can do that and have that influence is to utilize the stories that we come home from the mountains with as something that we utilize it as a way to talk about climate. And in our kind of little niche of the climbing and skiing world, or in the trail running and mountain biking world as well, we do a lot of storytelling. We spend a lot of time talking about these experiences and talking about our time in these amazing places, doing these amazing things. And if we can utilize that framework to talk about climate and utilize that as a way to say, like, these are changes that I've seen in these spaces, and maybe you've seen some similar things, it's a great way for us to create common ground with those around us, whether that's, just friends who might be a little bit ambivalent because they're focused on other things, or whether that's your like ornery uncle who's like, super right wing and doesn't believe in climate change, or doesn't think it's something worth voting on. That's how we can find common ground with folks and put them in a position where they feel enabled to take action and vote and call their reps and do all this work, and then share with others around them. And so it's something that when I look at going to the mountains, I of course go to the mountains because I love climbing. I love trying hard. I love trying stuff that hasn't been done before and is technical and all that jazz. But the things that I come home with are these stories that I can utilize to drive change. And I think if we like got our entire mountain community invested in that idea, it's like, think of what we could get done. It's so exciting. So that turns into like a reason to go on trips, so you can gather these stories that you can utilize to change the world. And that's like, I just love that shit. So that's really what gets me stoked on this stuff.
Well, and to give you a different perspective, I really do think that outdoor athletes are primed. It's like they've been like all their life in the outdoors. They've been primed to talk about what's changing around the world in different environments, and how the most extreme parts of the earth are changing quickest. In places like the high Alps and in the Himalaya, where water feeds so many people, or waters so many people, gets drinking water to so many people. So outdoor athletes are the best people, I think, in a lot of time to talk about this kind of stuff. So what's the next step for them, for people who want to take up the mission and go out and talk about this kind of thing? How can POW help them to do that?
Yeah, so let's see. If folks who are like professional athletes should get in touch with POW about joining the alliance, and then we actually have in the United States, and I think that there are a number of our global chapters have something similar, a membership program. So in the States, we call it Team POW, and it's a membership program that is open to anybody who wants to get involved. And through that, you basically kind of receive access to some of the the campaigns that we're running, what we're taking on, and how we're talking about it. Because I do think that, of course, Conrad Anker has the ability to affect a lot of folks because he talks to such a large community. But we all have community. We all have influence on those around us. And many of us also have these amazing stories from the mountains about climate change. And so I think that, as we look at athlete in the broadest sense of the word, anybody who, likes to use their body, I think that, thinking about these stories that we have and thinking about how they relate to climate and how they can be utilized to really encourage people to engage with their government and with their global society in a way that pushes us towards towards climate policy it's kind of that simple. And and I think the other thing is that I think is really important is it's really easy to get bogged down in the all the different types of solutions, all of the different bills that might be passing, all of the different events, all of the different opinions. And I think that, and a lot of people just don't have time. And I think that by working with organizations like Protect Our Winners, you're able to kind of automate some of that stuff. You're able to say I trust POW with the way that they are getting at this conversation. I am going to kind of follow through with actions that they provide me. You can do that with a few different organizations, of course. And it's a way to really stay action oriented rather than getting bogged down in the doom and gloom media that is so pervasive, across every subject, but certainly around climate. And I think that staying action oriented and really doing everything you can to stay optimistic is really the move. And on that subject of optimism, there's been some really interesting discussion recently on how much more challenging optimism is than being a naysayer. It is much easier to tear something down than it is to build it up. And so if we can just be moving in the direction of being a little bit optimistic, being supportive of each other, being supportive of solutions, being supportive of a variety of solutions for how we deal with climate, that's how we're going to move forward. Because really at this point, we need to do everything we can. It's not let's argue about this, that, or the other thing, or which one of these is better. It's we need to do everything because the clock is ticking fast, and we already have a lot of change baked into the cake. So we kind of got to get on it. So if you have a solution that you have access to, and you're the country that you're living in, it's either if you're if they're the progressives in your country are taking a certain action, or if the conservatives are, get behind it and support it, and know that any action is better than no action, and that's really where we need to go.
And all those actions and that support will only come from building a community. And I feel that's what POW has done, is built that community of athletes who want to do stuff for climate. So what a wonderful place to wrap that up. So we'll put links to POW US and some of the other chapters, and to your website as well, which has some wonderful content on it as well. But for now, Graham, thanks so much for taking part in the Athlete Climate Academy.
Oh, thank you for having me. This is a pleasure.
Pleasure's all mine. See you soon.
Be well.